Brought to you by LaunchPod Media.
Everybody, welcome to LaunchPod Media's series on Podcasting Basics 101. I'm John Tinkle, CEO of LaunchPod Media, and today I'm going to talk about the 5 different types of podcasts there are. If you've been thinking about getting into podcasts, whether you're making your own podcast or you're just really interested in podcasts and kind of want to get a feel for the whole market of all these individual shows you've been seeing pop up on your random podcast app on your phone, then this podcast video will be great for you. So there are 5 different individual types of podcasts that range from least popular to most popular. And I'm going to start from the least popular and build up to the most popular. So least most popular types of podcasts, that is for downloads, as in the amount of people listen to them, is basically the interview type podcast. Now, I know the comment section is already raging, but Johnny, how about Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and London Real and all these cool people that I know who do interview podcasts? I will tell you right now, these people are the exception, not the rule. These people are super famous and are getting big names onto their podcast. Think about it this way. If you're thinking about starting a podcast and you want to interview interesting people from whatever area of life that you're in, whether you're talking about SEO or whether you're talking about leatherworking, I doubt, unless they are super in the industry like you are, they actually care who the people are that you're going to interview. You may say, well, I know this person. Okay, now name 51 more people like that actually you can get onto your program. Unless you can find more interesting people or have more interesting situations like Joe Rogan getting Elon Musk to smoke weed with him, there is very little reason for them to actually go and listen to your podcast. If you're just interviewing people, what authority do you have? It's all based on the type of people you're getting on your show. That being said, interview podcasts can be quite popular. Like I said, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, London Real, all these other wonderful shows, they get super smart people on. That being said, if you want to do an interview podcast, you may rethink this just a little bit and make sure you're always adding your own individual type of content. The next most interesting type of podcast with the download rates is the personality podcast. The personality podcast works something like this. Me, myself, and another friend all get together every single Friday and we talk about the things that we're interested in. Whether it's movies or whether it's Dungeons and Dragons, whether we're talking about music or whether we're talking about what we think about politically, all of these types of podcasts are friends, people that get together and really have a good personality and we mesh well together. This really relies on the personalities and how well we all integrate together and how much the listener wants to be part of that friend group. If I have 4 friends that are all super interesting and we just mesh super well and you want to be part of that friend group, that's a great thing to talk about. Usually these are organized around media related topics. However, these are just barely more interesting than interview podcasts. Unless they like your personality, they're not going to listen. And unless they get it referred to by a friend, the likelihood of them wanting to join that friend group is very low. The type of people we see mostly on this are like radio personalities, or people who have a high-level personality on a social media platform, usually Instagram. So if you have a great personality, and you want to start a show, definitely think about this type of one. However, it's usually not that interesting in my perspective. That is because I don't always mesh with every single personality type. And the large amount of voices tends to be somewhat confusing for all the people listening. It's hard for them to nail down a host that they really connect with. And if that is a host that's usually fluctuating in and out of this group of friends, it may not give them a good enough reason for them to subscribe to your show. The third most common type of podcast, or the third most successful type of podcast that is the news or informational type of podcast. This is a very interesting type of podcast and the type of podcast that I at LaunchPod Media most commonly work with our clients. These are the type of podcasts which is usually 1, maybe 2 hosts max, which talk about a very specific type of content, usually micro content, but can swing up to 45 minutes. And this type of content is great because it's very specific. Usually these are things like talking about an area of knowledge that you've worked in or have had a relationship with for a long time. If you're a college professor that talks about Japanese literature, you would talk about Japanese literature. Every single week you'd review a book or type of content where you have an area of expertise that people want to learn from and educate themselves. Another example of this would be if you're really into sneakers and you want to know really deep about the sneaker industry and how that's changed all the way back from Michael Jordan to nowadays with, Kanye West and other people doing their own type of content. That being said, you have to have area of expertise. You actually have to know what you're talking about. The podcast listener is very, very intelligent. Majority of them have have at least a college diploma, and of those types, a lot of them have at least an advanced degree. Most of the podcast listenership has more than enough money to be able to provide for themselves, or they want to be able to learn about a topic that they already know about. So if you're a con artist, or if you have a little bit of knowledge but not a wide variety of knowledge on a very deep topic, that they're going to know right away, and they're going to call BS. So if you don't know what you're talking about, and if you can't feel like you can contribute to a Reddit or a forum on this particular topic, stay far, far away from this type of podcast. Now, the most popular type of podcast is the story podcast. Everyone's heard of Homecoming, Lore, Dr. Death, etc., Dirty John. All of these individual podcasts have one thing in common: they're stories. These type of stories grip the listener in, pull them in like a classic radio show that they can actually do while washing the dishes. These stories are episodic or slowly evolving over time like Night Vale, or they've been able to create a story that's eventually been turned into a film like Lore. So if you have a story that you want to tell and you can tell it in an artistic way like Brandon Sanderson or Neil Gaiman, these types of podcasts do fantastically well. However, they have to be done in such a way that the person doesn't feel kicked out when they hear a political comment or when they hear a certain type of vibe or conversation that would remove them from wanting to listen. This is a very, very touchy area, but if you can relay a well-created, well-documented story with a beginning, middle, and an end with seasons or what have you, this will be something that will grip the listener and will make them want to listen. Now, you can do this of a wide variety. You can have a simple narrator like an audiobook talking about the sequence of events that happens through a story that changes every single episode and encourages me to want to listen from the beginning to the end or every single week. Or this can be a dramatized type of podcast where you have numerous different voices talking about a topic and have them doing the different voices of the individual characters, so you get used to their voices. This is a great way of doing podcasts, but it's a little more technical on the back end, so make sure you have the right equipment to be able to do this type of podcast. With that, now you said there are five type of podcasts, and I've yet to mention the most popular one, but I actually have. That one is the story podcast. Then there is the wide variety of other podcasts. These are podcasts usually promoted by larger brands, things like news, a news site that comes up every day like Japanese NHK, where they come up with a simple sequence of the news, or they have a particular news story that they're following, or they're reading a particular type that has a beginning, middle, and end, but necessarily isn't a story. This other type isn't as common, but it does exist. Sometimes there's just random things like the rise and fall of Roman history, which was super popular and was actually gave the rise to podcasting back in early 2014. However, this is kind of an odd podcast type that really has no function or form. And if you have a crazy podcast idea, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. So if you want to learn about podcasts or about any type of podcast content, I'd love to hear your questions down in the comments as well. Podcasting is an extremely difficult area to get into and has a wide variety of content like I mentioned today. Whether you're doing interviews, whether you're talking with friends, giving information, or you're doing a story podcast, or you're in that strange, nebulous other area, I'd love to hear about your show in the comments. Make sure to leave a link to it so I can check it out. And next time I do a video on this particular topic, I'll try to include a couple of examples given down in the comments. That being said, we also care for a like and a subscription to this channel. So if you like this content, you want more of it, like it. If you don't like it, don't give us a thumb down. Just tell me. I want to know, guys. Come on, work with me here. That being said, thank you so much, and I will join you next time. I'm John Dinkle with LaunchPod Media. Thanks so much.